The theme for this year's report on the power of choice in relation to reproductive rights is a very sobering one. The right of all couples and individuals to decide freely and responsibly the number, spacing, and timing of their children, and to have the information and means to do so, and the right to have the highest standard of sexual and reproductive health has been the flagship agreement of the Programme of Action of the International Conference on Population and Development, Cairo 1994. Now, this agreement in the context of 1994, in which men dominated the delegations from most countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, with strong patriarchal cultures, can be considered as monumental. That right, that agreement. And I want you to understand that in the context of 1994. Jamaica's delegation, comprising stalwarts from the Ministry of Health, UNFPA, PIOJ, and the Thomspon, played critical roles in this achievement, as was stated this morning. Now, the demographic transition, as we have seen in the presentation by Seth, in simple terms, is the change from a situation of high fertility and mortality, reflecting a stage of underdevelopment, to a state of low fertility and mortality, reflecting a stage of advanced development. That is the transition really taking place within that context, from low development and non-development to a place of high development, with these changes in fertility and mortality levels considered to be in a closed population. Population growth at both ends of the transition is usually very low or negative. From the first fertility side of the transition, the average number of children that a woman produces over her reproductive life cycle is key in determining how long or fast the transition will take. Note that all countries, by theory, are expected to pass through the various stages of the demographic transition. Developed countries have already completed the transition. Developing countries, that's where we are at, are within the transition. And as we heard this morning from our Director General, that we are at the advanced stage of the transition. Any variation in average number of children that a woman produces, especially in context where women have limited or no choice, will affect the pace of the transition and the size of the population. Under current and past patterns of fertility, the UN projects that the global population will reach 8.6 billion persons by 2030, 9.8 billion by 2050, and approach a maximum at about 11 billion by 2021, by 2100. Any deviation in the assumptions, particularly relating to the rate of fertility decline among women with limited or no choice, particularly in Africa and some other countries in the world, may push global population to around 13 billion or more by 2100. So any small variations in fertility, especially among those countries in Africa or otherwise, may really change the maximum population that the world is expected to have by 2100. Let me highlight the case of Jamaica. Jamaica's transition from a state of low population growth in the context of high fertility and high mortality from the 1930s to the current position of low population growth, but with low fertility and mortality rates. This was achieved through the progressive access of women to contraception or contraceptives since the 1930s and the introduction of the government-led National Family Planning Program in the late 1960s. Of course, this was achieved almost within the context of other social and economic changes. Women in Jamaica, to a large extent, have been able to break down the structures and cultures of male domination and created a freedom space for the exercise of their right to choose the number, timing, and spacing of their children.